What would you do if a complete stranger paid for your coffee, not knowing you could buy the entire coffee shop chain with your pocket change? This is exactly what happened when Daniel, the billionaire CEO of Crestline Group, decided to take the long way to work and blend in with his own employees. But here's the twist. The person who showed him this act of kindness was about to discover that sometimes the universe has a way of rewarding generosity in the most unexpected ways. The cafe on the ground floor of Crestline Tower was already packed by 7:30 a.m. People in suits, heels, uniforms, and ID tags filled every corner, their voices blending with the sharp hiss of the coffee machine and the clatter of ceramic cups. Daniel walked in unnoticed. He didn't like attention, never had. Even though he was the CEO of the entire Crestline Group, the company that owned nearly half the floors in the very building he'd just stepped into, Daniel preferred to blend in. Dressed in a simple navy blue shirt and dark trousers, he looked like any other young professional starting his day, a phone in one hand, keys in the other, no assistant, no driver, no name tag, just another face in the crowd. He moved to the end of the queue, his eyes scanning the menu even though he already knew what he wanted. No one gave him a second look, and why would they? Only administrative staff ever saw the CEO in person, and even they rarely did. Daniel mostly worked behind closed doors on the top floor, using the private elevator reserved for executives. Most employees wouldn't recognize him even if they sat next to him. Today he had taken the long way on purpose. There was something refreshing about moving unnoticed, being normal. The line moved slowly. He shifted his weight, glancing at the time. He wasn't in a rush, but it seemed everyone else was. A woman behind him groaned, "This line is too slow." Another man added sharply, "If you don't have money, please step aside. Some of us have work to get to." A few heads turned toward Daniel, frowning, irritated. He was next at the counter, but the holdup was now on him. He stepped forward calmly. "1 cappuccino, please. Extra shot." "That'll be 1,500, the barista said with a polite smile. Daniel tapped his card. "Declined." He frowned and tried again. "Declined." Confused, he quickly checked his phone. Battery low, no notification. He reached for his other pocket, then paused. His wallet wasn't with him. He must have left it in his jacket. "Ah," he sighed under his breath. "I think I left my wallet at home." The barista glanced nervously at the long line behind him. "Should I cancel the order, sir?" he asked. Daniel hesitated, suddenly aware of the tension building behind him. "Excuse me, we don't have all day," someone snapped. "Please, either pay or move. You're wasting everybody's time," another voice barked. Daniel took a small step back. "I'm sorry," he said, trying to remain calm. "You can cancel it. It's fine." Before the barista could respond, a quiet voice spoke from behind. "I'll pay for it." Daniel turned. A young woman in a cleaner's uniform stepped forward. She held a mop in one hand, a small phone in the other. Her uniform was faded at the edges but neat and clean. Her face was calm, sincere. "You don't have to," Daniel began. "It's all right," she said gently, already tapping her phone on the payment reader. Beep. Transaction successful. The barista gave a small nod and turned to prepare the drink. Daniel stared at her, clearly taken aback. "Are you sure?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Yes. It's just coffee. If it were me, you'd probably do the same." He paused. "I really wasn't expecting this." "You looked like you needed a break more than anything," she said softly. The barista handed him the cup. He took it, then turned to Sarah again. "Thank you. I mean it." "You're welcome," she said, and was already turning back to her cart. Just then, a bit of foam splashed from the cup onto his shirt. Daniel glanced down at the small spot and sighed. Before he could do anything, Sarah reached into the pouch on her cleaning cart, pulled out a folded napkin, and stepped toward him. "Hold still," she said quietly. She gently dabbed the stain, quick, precise, respectful, then stepped back. There, almost gone. He smiled, genuinely touched. "Thanks again. I didn't catch your name." "Sarah," she replied without hesitation. "And he started. But she was already walking away. Daniel stood there for a moment, still holding the warm coffee, watching her disappear into the lobby with her cart. No fanfare, no expectations, just quiet kindness. He took a sip, and for a brief second the weight of his world felt lighter. Daniel stepped into the elevator with his coffee in hand, still thinking about what had just happened. As the doors closed and the lift began its smooth climb to the top floor, he glanced down at the light brown stain still faintly visible on his shirt. He smiled a little, not out of embarrassment, but from something else, something warmer, something rare. It wasn't every day someone offered help without knowing who he was, without asking for anything in return. By the time he reached the 18th floor, where only the executive offices existed, his smile had faded slightly. He stepped out into the quiet hallway, nodding briefly at his assistant, Tolu, who stood holding a tablet near the conference room. "Morning, sir," Tolu said. "Morning," Daniel replied. "Please remind me to send someone to check the card I used this morning. I think there's a problem." Tolu looked confused. "Sir, did it not go through?" "No, I left my wallet in my other suit. Tried using the card saved on my phone, but it failed." "Oh, that's strange. I'll have the bank call you." Daniel nodded. "And do me another favor." "Yes, sir?" "Find out more about one of the cleaners, Sarah." Tolu blinked. "From the janitorial staff?" "Yes," Daniel said, walking into his office. "She paid for my coffee this morning." Tolu raised an eyebrow, unsure if he heard correctly. "She... what?" "You heard me," Daniel said, setting his coffee down and loosening his tie slightly. "I didn't have my wallet. She stepped in and paid, no hesitation. Even helped clean my shirt afterward." Tolu's eyes widened. "She didn't recognize you?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Not at all. That's what made it so... honest." Tolu nodded slowly. "I'll ask HR for her file." "No," Daniel said, sitting at his desk. "Don't make it formal. Just check quietly. I want to know what she's been assigned to, how long she's been working here. Don't scare her." Tolu scribbled it down. "Got it." As he left, Daniel leaned back in his chair, coffee in hand. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Sarah had stepped up, confidently, naturally, without a second thought. No awkwardness, no hidden motive. People rarely treated him that way anymore. They either wanted something or they were too afraid of his position to speak freely. But she didn't even look at him twice. He sipped the cappuccino. It was smooth and rich, just how he liked it. And yet, it wasn't the drink he was thinking about. It was her voice, the calm in it, the warmth, and how it cut through the noise of an ordinary morning. Sarah. He repeated the name in his mind, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it carried a presence now, a moment of quiet kindness he hadn't expected. He sipped his coffee again, then reached for the stack of folders on his desk. That morning, he had planned to review profiles for a small but important internal initiative, Crestline's community outreach pilot. The goal was simple: give overlooked staff a chance to grow, train, and contribute to meaningful projects beyond their roles. It was his personal effort to break the walls between departments, especially for junior and support staff. He opened the first folder. Clean resume, polished background, good grades. Then another, same thing. Well-crafted, neatly written, but somehow all the same. He sighed, leaned back slightly and rubbed his temples. Then his hand stopped on a thin folder, the paper a little more worn than the rest. He glanced at the name at the top. Sarah James. He straightened. Daniel opened the file slowly. His eyes scanning the content, he recognized her picture immediately. The same Sarah, the kind cleaner he just met. It wasn't perfect. In fact, at first glance, it had all the red flags that HR usually filtered out automatically. Her education ended at the senior secondary level. No university. Just 1 year of a diploma program discontinued. A short cover letter, handwritten. But something about the tone caught his attention. "I've worked here for almost 3 years. I don't have a degree, but I learn fast. I believe in the power of second chances." Daniel frowned slightly. The words were simple, not flashy, but they were honest. He turned to the comments left by the selection team. Incomplete qualifications. No relevant experience. Discard. The word rejected was stamped in red across the top corner. He stared at it for a long moment. His mind drifted back to her again. How quickly she had reacted in the cafe. How she didn't flinch, didn't ask for anything. How she had stepped forward when no one else had. She didn't know he was the CEO, and she didn't care. Daniel sat quietly at his desk, the soft hum of the AC the only sound in the room. The folder with Sarah James's name was still open before him, but something felt incomplete. He wanted to know more, not as a CEO trying to check boxes, but as a man trying to understand the story behind the paper. He turned to his computer and logged into the company portal. In the employee search bar, he typed, Sarah James. Several names popped up, but only one matched the department code for janitorial services. He clicked. Her profile loaded slowly, almost like it was hesitating to be seen. There wasn't much there. A photo, simple, no makeup, a plain smile. Age 26, joined Crestline 3 years ago. Current position, floor and facilities assistant, assigned mostly to office floors 710. The basic employment details were there, but Daniel scrolled down, looking for something more personal, something real. At the bottom of the page, he found the additional comments section. Few employees ever used it. Sarah had. Just one line, typed in simple, quiet words. Just looking for purpose, not pity. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at that sentence. He wasn't easily moved. He'd read thousands of profiles over the years, some filled with ambition, others with praise. But this was different. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't an excuse. It was a statement, honest, stripped of performance. He looked back at the red, rejected stamp on her physical file and felt something tighten in his chest. On paper, Sarah James was a cleaner with gaps in education and no experience in outreach programs. But in real life, she was the one person in a crowded cafe full of frustrated professionals who didn't look away, who acted with courage, who paid for a stranger's coffee and walked away without needing anything in return. And now he saw her again, not in uniform, not with a mop, but in this line of text that told him everything he needed to know. She didn't want charity. She wanted a chance. Daniel exhaled slowly. He couldn't let it go. There was something about Sarah that kept tugging at his attention, not just her kindness, but the quiet strength behind it. The gaps in her resume didn't bother him anymore. In fact, they made him curious. What had she been through? What story sat between the lines? He opened a deeper employee record request, something only senior executives had access to. With a few clicks, he bypassed the generic HR overview and entered the internal background reports. At first, it looked routine: application date, staff ID, emergency contact, and performance reviews. But then, something stood out. Education, discontinued. A handwritten note from her file was scanned in at the bottom of the page. Discontinued diploma studies, family emergency cited, no follow-up. Daniel paused. He leaned forward, typing her full name into the company's extended background check tool, which connected to publicly available records. He didn't expect much. But then, a result popped up. Local news archive 7 years ago. He stared at his screen, the words in the article still echoing in his mind. Family of 5 trapped in building fire, 2 confirmed dead. He had reread it twice, each time slower. Sarah's parents had died that night. She was just 19. She had saved her 2 younger siblings, carried them out of a burning building, and after that she didn't go back to school. She didn't go on with her diploma. She just disappeared from the system and became what society often overlooked, a girl who worked to survive. No wonder there were gaps in her resume. No wonder there were no big certificates or perfect timelines. But that one quiet line she'd written kept repeating in his head. Just looking for purpose, not pity. She had helped him when no one else would, and now it was time he paid her back. Daniel sat forward again, cleared the draft email he had been typing to HR earlier, and began anew, this time carefully. To HR Director Miss A. Bako, subject, internal candidate review, Sarah James, facilities. Kindly remove the rejection status from Sarah James. I have personally reviewed her file and background. She is to be reclassified under priority review. Schedule a direct one-on-one interview with me. Regards, CEO Daniel. He read it once more, then clicked send. Leaning back in his chair, he let the silence settle. His office was high above the street, too far for the sounds of the world to reach him. But in his chest, something stirred. Something that felt personal. His thoughts drifted again, not to her resume, but to her, the cleaner in the faded uniform. The girl who paid for his coffee. The young woman who once pulled her siblings from a burning home, then quietly rebuilt her life from the ashes, without complaint, without applause. No one in HR would have seen any of that in a line of text. But he saw it now, and that was enough. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. Tolu, his assistant, stepped in with a file in hand. "Sir, the community pilot shortlist you asked for," he said. Daniel nodded but didn't reach for it. "She's not on that list," he said quietly. Tolu paused, confused. "Sir?" "Sarah James, cleaner from floor 7. Add her to the top," Daniel said. "She's no longer part of the support staff in my eyes." Tolu stood still, his expression softening slightly. "Noted, sir." "And Tolu, don't mention this to anyone else yet." "Yes, sir." As the door closed, Daniel turned back toward the city beyond the glass wall. Down there somewhere, Sarah was probably mopping a hallway or wiping a desk. And she had no idea that the man she helped that morning was now fighting for her in a boardroom she never thought she'd enter. He looked down at the empty cup beside him. It had gone cold. But the feeling it left behind, still warm. The following morning, Sarah stood outside the tall glass door, her hands gently folded in front of her, trying to calm the quiet storm inside her chest. She had received the message barely 24 hours ago, an unexpected internal email from Human Resources asking her to report directly to the CEO's office for a one-on-one meeting. No details. Just a time, a floor, a name. Her name. She had stared at the screen for a long time, unsure if it was real. Now, standing outside the 18th floor office, wearing her cleanest uniform and holding her breath, it felt even less real. A soft voice called from behind the desk inside. "You can go in now." Sarah nodded politely and stepped through the doors, her heart pounding. Daniel stood from behind his desk the moment she entered. He was dressed neatly, not in a suit, just a shirt with the sleeves slightly rolled up. There was no boardroom air about him, no cold authority, just a man, calm, present. "Sarah," he said with a warm smile. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, her voice caught somewhere between nerves and disbelief. "Good afternoon, sir." "Please sit," he said, gesturing to a seat across from him. She sat slowly, her hands folded on her lap, her eyes unsure. He noticed. "You look nervous," he said gently. "A little," she admitted, trying not to fidget. "I've never been in an office like this." Daniel smiled. "That's all right. You're here because I wanted to speak with you. Not as a cleaner, not as staff, but as someone who made a real impression on me." Sarah blinked. "I don't understand." He leaned forward, resting his arms lightly on the desk. "You paid for my coffee yesterday morning." Her eyes widened. "That was you?" He nodded. "I didn't say who I was at the time. Most people don't recognize me unless they've worked in upper management." Sarah's mouth parted slightly in surprise. "You're the CEO?" "I am." She sat back, clearly stunned. "I had no idea. I'm sorry if—" "Don't apologize," Daniel said quickly. "That's what made it matter." Sarah looked at him confused. "Most people offer help when they recognize me," he explained, "when they think there's something to gain. But you didn't know. You just acted." She paused, then said softly, "Because I know what it feels like." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "What do you mean?" She looked down for a moment, choosing her words. Then she lifted her gaze. "I know what it feels like to need help and get none," she said quietly. There was a silence in the room. Not uncomfortable, just full. Daniel leaned back slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. "I read your file," he said after a pause. "I know about your parents. The fire." Sarah didn't speak. She only nodded once. "You dropped everything to care for your family," he added. "You gave up school, your future, everything." She shrugged slightly, but her eyes betrayed how much it had cost her. "They needed me. There wasn't anyone else." Daniel nodded. "That's exactly why you're sitting here." She blinked again. "I don't understand. I'm starting a new internal project, one that gives people like you, the ones who never got the chance, a real shot. I want you to be part of it." Her breath caught. "Me?" "Yes, you." She looked at him uncertain. "Sir, I don't have a degree. I haven't done anything special." "You've done more than most," he said gently. "You helped a stranger when it was inconvenient, with no promise of recognition. That tells me more about who you are than any certificate ever could." For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. Then she looked at him with quiet honesty. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel smiled. "Because someone finally reminded me what real strength looks like." Sarah sat quietly, still trying to process the last few minutes. The CEO of Crestline Group, not just any man, but the same man she helped without even knowing, was now offering her something she had never dared to imagine. A way forward. Daniel reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out a plain white envelope. He slid it across the table toward her. Inside was a formal letter, an offer for a paid internship under the community outreach pilot. The position came with mentorship, weekly training sessions, and a chance to work directly with some of the department leads across the company. Sarah stared at it, hands frozen midair. She began, but her voice trailed off. She looked at him, searching for clarity. "You're offering this because I helped you?" Daniel smiled gently, shaking his head. "No," he said. "I'm offering this because I need someone like you." She blinked. Her eyes welled slightly, but she held them back. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. And he didn't pity her. There was only respect in the room. Quiet, mutual respect. "I'm not trying to repay you," Daniel added. "This isn't charity. You showed me something I've been missing in this company heart. We have people with credentials, but very few with your kind of strength." Sarah looked down at the envelope again. Her voice came out small but sure. "All right," she said softly. "I'll take it." Daniel exhaled quietly, relieved. "Good. You start next week. You'll shadow 2 teams for the first month, and I'll check in with you personally." She smiled now, shy but warm. "Okay," she said. Then she looked up at him, eyes steady. "But only if I get to pay for the next tea." Daniel laughed, leaning back in his chair. "Deal." They both stood. Sarah tucked the envelope carefully into her bag. And as Daniel walked her to the door, there was no formality, no stiff goodbye, just 2 people who had shared something rare, a moment of kindness that had grown into something neither of them expected. As the door opened and Sarah stepped into the hallway, Daniel called after her. "Sarah?" She turned. "Thank you for not looking away." She nodded once, then smiled again. "You're welcome." And then she was gone. Sarah stepped into the 10th floor's open-plan office on Monday morning, wearing a neatly ironed blouse and modest black trousers. Her uniform was gone, but she still felt like people could see it clinging to her skin. The welcome was quiet. A few curious glances, a few murmured greetings. Most eyes didn't linger, but she felt them all the same. Daniel had arranged for her to be placed with the operations team for the first 2 weeks. She had her own desk, small, near the window, and a printed orientation schedule waiting in her email. It all looked official, professional, like she belonged. But still she felt out of place. Her hands hovered awkwardly over the keyboard. Her eyes darted from screen to file, trying to make sense of unfamiliar dashboards and unfamiliar language. Behind her, she heard the whispers begin. Isn't that the cleaner from downstairs? They said the CEO hired her personally. For what, though? Sympathy internship? She doesn't even have a proper degree. Sarah kept her head down. She didn't respond, didn't look up. She just opened the next document and started reading. At lunch, she didn't join the group at the cafe. She stayed at her desk with a water bottle and a banana, flipping through printouts and writing questions in a small notebook. When her supervisor, Ada, passed by, she looked surprised. You're still here? Yes, Sarah said. Just catching up. Ada paused. Need help with anything? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Actually, yes. Can you explain what this part means? She said, pointing to a section of the file. Ada blinked, clearly not expecting her to ask, but slowly pulled a chair closer. That was how it began. Sarah didn't argue with the gossip. She didn't try to prove anything. She came early, stayed late, and asked questions. Genuine questions. Every hour she scribbled notes. Every night she reread what she didn't understand. The comments didn't stop. She doesn't fit in. Why is she acting like she's staff now? Let's see how long she lasts. But Sarah kept going. She was struggling, yes, but not sinking. She was learning. And no matter what they whispered behind her back, she told herself one thing every morning. You earned this seat. Now earn your place in it. 2 weeks into the internship, Sarah was still the quiet one in the room. She rarely spoke in meetings. She usually sat near the edge of the conference table, listening more than contributing, always scribbling in her notebook. Most people still overlooked her, some out of habit, others out of doubt. But she was watching, studying. One Tuesday morning, the operations team gathered in the main boardroom for a strategy session. They were reviewing current departmental costs and challenges. Charts were projected on the screen. Words like redundancy, budget caps, and resource optimization were being thrown around. Daniel joined the meeting quietly and sat at the back, listening. As the conversation circled the same problem for the third time, excessive spending on cross-department software licenses, Sarah raised her hand. It was the first time she had done that. The room went still. Ada, her supervisor, gave a small nod. Yes, Sarah? I've been reviewing the software logs and monthly reports, she said, her voice clear but careful. There are 3 departments paying for the same tool, but using it differently. We could cut down those subscriptions and just give shared access to one team, then reroute requests through them. A few people blinked. Some looked confused. But Daniel sat forward slightly. Sarah opened her laptop, her hands trembling a little as she turned it toward the room. I made a sample consolidation map. If this is applied, it could cut the cost by almost 80% without affecting output. Silence, then murmurs, then questions, real ones. How did you pull the logs? What tool did you use to track usage hours? Can you email that map to us now? Sarah answered each one, nervous but sure. Daniel didn't say anything, but his eyes never left her. By the time the meeting ended, the tone had shifted. People no longer looked at her like a charity case. They looked at her like someone with value. That afternoon, Daniel returned to his office. He was used to the silence. The high floors were always quiet, and most of the time so was he. That was the price of leadership. Long hours, heavy choices, and very little room for softness. He was unlocking his office when he noticed something new. A white ceramic mug sat on the edge of his desk, steam rising from it softly. Chamomile tea, his favorite. Beside it, a folded note written in small, neat handwriting. You look tired. The world can wait. He stood still, reading the words slowly. No one had made him tea in years. Not since his mother passed. Back then, she used to leave quiet reminders like this on his study desk. A cup, a note, a nudge to pause. Since she died, people had treated him like a machine, efficient, respected, but emotionally distant. No one had cared about his tired eyes or the weight in his chest. Until now. He picked up the note and read it again. Then he sat down slowly, lifted the mug to his lips, and took a deep breath. The tea was warm, but what moved him wasn't the taste. It was the message, the thought, the feeling of being seen. The following week brought pressure. Crestline Group was hosting a quarterly review with major investors, and expectations were high. Several projects were behind schedule. Budgets were tight. Tension filled the corridors even before the meeting began. The conference room on the top floor was polished and full. Executives, investors, partners from outside firms, all seated around a long table. At the head sat Daniel, calm on the outside but carrying the weight of every delayed deadline on his shoulders. The presentation began smoothly, until it didn't. Halfway through the projection slide, one of the senior investors interrupted. "Daniel," he said, adjusting his glasses, "we've poured money into this expansion plan. Why are we seeing delays again?" Another investor chimed in. "We were promised systems would be live by now. What exactly happened?" The tone shifted quickly, polite but pointed. More voices joined in, each laced with blame. "Where's the accountability? Is leadership aligned on any of this? We need better controls in place. How did this happen on your watch?" Daniel remained composed, jaw tight, fingers folded. He didn't respond immediately. He'd heard these tones before, professional on the surface, but sharpened beneath. He started to speak, but a soft voice from the corner cut through the air. "Excuse me." Heads turned. It was Sarah. She had been seated quietly against the wall with the support team, there to observe, not speak, but now her voice was steady, her presence unshaken. She stood. "I know I'm new here," she said, "and I don't have a title, but I've been reviewing the operations reports. The delays weren't because people weren't doing their jobs. It was because 3 departments were solving the same problem in isolation." Silence as she continued, calmly, clearly. "If we streamline the approval flow and create a shared tracker between departments, we'll cut delays by more than half. The issue wasn't the people, it was the process." The room was quiet. Investors looked at each other, then back at her. Daniel watched her the entire time. After a beat, someone finally asked, "Can we see that tracker?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I've already drafted a mock-up. It's ready to test." The conversation shifted. What had been a room full of tension became a room full of interest. By the time the meeting ended, the criticism had faded. People left with notes, timelines, and even a little optimism. Daniel stayed behind, slowly gathering his papers, still processing what had just happened. Sarah was about to slip out quietly when he stopped her. "Why did you help me?" She turned to look at him. "Because you looked alone," she said simply. "And I know that feeling." He stared at her for a moment. No more words. Just the truth between them. The Crestline Tower ballroom had never looked more alive. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from the ceiling, casting golden reflections across the polished floor. Soft music floated through the air, and the entire space buzzed with warmth, laughter, and the hum of a company proud of its 10-year journey. The 10th anniversary gala was in full swing. Executives clinked glasses, investors gave speeches. Laughter rose between toasts and soft jazz, and the waiters moved smoothly between tables with trays of sparkling drinks and small desserts. Daniel stood near the back, dressed in a dark tailored suit, nodding politely as board members passed by with smiles and greetings. But his mind wasn't in the crowd. It was near the balcony. That's where he saw her, Sarah. She stood just outside the glass doors, half hidden by a row of tall plants. Her dress was simple, a second-hand gown in soft blue satin. It didn't sparkle, it didn't shimmer, but it fit her perfectly, and more importantly, she wore it with quiet pride. Her hair was pinned back loosely, and her arms were wrapped around herself as the cool evening breeze brushed against her shoulders. She was shivering. Daniel stepped away from the crowd and made his way outside. Sarah didn't notice him at first. She was watching the sky, waiting for something. "Cold?" he asked gently. She turned, a little startled. "Just a bit. I didn't think the night would be this chilly." Without saying another word, Daniel slipped off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm and heavy, and smelled faintly of cedar and fresh air. Sarah looked down at it, then up at him. "Thank you," she said softly. They stood side by side, the quiet hum of the party behind them and the city stretching far below. A few seconds later, the first burst of fireworks lit up the sky. Red, gold, blue. Sarah's eyes reflected the color as she watched in silence. Daniel glanced sideways at her, at the woman who had once been just a cleaner on a schedule he'd never noticed, and now, standing beside him, wrapped in his jacket, she looked powerful, not because of the dress, but because of the fire inside her, the same quiet strength he had seen from the very beginning. He took a breath, then spoke, not loudly, but clearly. "I can't promise life will be easy," he said. She turned to look at him. "But I can promise to walk beside you." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Sarah smiled, and slowly, without a word, she reached out and slipped her hand into his. Not tightly, just enough to say, "I'm here." The energy from the anniversary gala lingered in the halls of Crestline Tower long after the lights had dimmed and the music had faded. Everyone returned to work with full inboxes and tighter deadlines, but something in the air felt lighter, like the company had crossed into a new chapter. Sarah was back at her desk early that morning, just as always. Now in her 4th week of internship, her confidence had grown, not in loud ways, but in how she carried herself. She still asked questions, still stayed late, still left thoughtful notes on Daniel's desk reminding him to rest, though he never said much about them. But he noticed. Everyone did. Later that afternoon, Sarah stepped out of a budget training session and walked past the side corridor near the analytics wing. As she passed one of the smaller cubicles, she heard soft sobbing. She paused. Inside, she saw Mia, a young intern from finance, hunched over her desk, eyes red, fingers gripping a crumpled paper. Sarah stepped in quietly. "Hey," she said gently. "You okay?" Mia startled, quickly wiping her cheeks and forcing a smile. "Yes, it's nothing." Sarah didn't say anything. She just pulled up a spare chair and sat beside her. For a few seconds, they sat in silence. Then Mia whispered, "I messed up a report. Bad. It's going to affect next week's client presentation, and I don't know if I belong here." Sarah nodded slowly, understanding more than Mia could imagine. She didn't give a lecture. She didn't offer a fake pep talk. She just said softly, "If you want, I'll go over it with you." Mia looked at her startled. Sarah smiled gently. "You're not alone." Mia's shoulders dropped slightly, the weight in her chest beginning to lift. A few meters down the hallway, Daniel had just stepped out of a meeting and caught the scene through the glass. He didn't interrupt. He didn't step in. He just stood there, quietly watching as Sarah leaned over the desk, calmly showing Mia how to break down the error. There was no audience, no applause. Just leadership, the kind that shows up when no one's watching. That evening, as they walked out of the building together, Daniel finally spoke. "You lead better than most managers in this company." Sarah turned to him, surprised. "I didn't do much." He shook his head. "You did exactly what was needed." They walked a few more steps in silence. Then Daniel added softly, "You make me rethink what leadership really means." Sarah didn't reply. She didn't need to. She just smiled. The ripples of Sarah's quiet leadership didn't stop at one moment or one meeting. They kept growing. Daniel saw it everywhere now, in the questions people were beginning to ask, the way junior staff was suddenly being listened to, the way Sarah's name carried weight, not because of her position, but because of how she showed up. One morning, Daniel stood in front of the boardroom whiteboard, scribbling ideas. The phrase at the top was circled twice. The second door. It was Sarah's story that planted the idea, even if she never asked for it. A hiring initiative, not for the perfect resumes, but for those who had been left out, those with incomplete education, gaps in experience, broken timelines, people who had been told no, not because they couldn't, but because no one took the time to ask why. The second door was a second chance. By the end of the month, the program was formally launched. What started as an internal experiment quickly gained attention. Articles were written. News outlets picked it up. Other companies reached out, curious, inspired. Then came the invitation to speak at a national business forum on innovation, leadership, and hiring with empathy. Daniel didn't hesitate. That afternoon, he stood on stage beneath bright lights, a simple navy blue suit hugging his frame, the company's new logo glowing behind him on the giant screen. He scanned the crowd before beginning. Then he spoke, calm and clear. We spend so much time looking at numbers, timelines, credentials, that we forget to look at people. He paused. The second door started with someone who saw me. Not my job, not my title, just me. Backstage, Sarah stood quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. She watched him speak, not as the CEO, not even as her mentor, but as the man she once handed a cup of coffee to. Their eyes met across the distance. He didn't smile, but his gaze held something stronger, gratitude. After the event, the crowd buzzed with applause and handshakes, but Daniel slipped quietly into a hallway away from the noise. Sarah found him there. He looked at her with a soft expression. That speech, that was because of you, he said. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You stood up there on your own. Daniel shook his head slightly. You gave me a reason to. She smiled gently. You always stood tall, she said. I just reminded you to look around. He let out a breath, half a laugh, half something heavier. Then together they walked side by side toward the exit, no longer just CEO and intern, but equals. The night after the event felt different. There were no cameras, no flashing lights, no crowd. Just Daniel and Sarah walking side by side beneath the soft glow of the city's street lamps, their shadows stretching gently ahead of them. He had offered her a ride, but she said she'd rather walk. So they did. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Their steps led them, naturally unplanned, to the cafe at the base of Crestline Tower. The same place where it all began. It was quieter now, the evening rush long gone. A few chairs were empty, the smell of roasted beans still lingering faintly in the air. As they stepped inside, the barista at the counter looked up and froze. His eyes widened in recognition. Ah, it's the two of you, he said with a grin. Let me guess, forgot your wallet again, sir? Daniel laughed, genuinely amused. Not this time. Sarah smirked, nudging him gently with her elbow. Even if he did, I'd still cover it. They placed their order, a cappuccino for him, warm ginger tea for her, and found a small table by the window. As they sat down, their hands brushed across the table. Neither moved away. Sarah smiled softly and said, This was never just about tea. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something more than just success or relief. He felt peace. 2 cups sat between them. Steam rose. And from a quiet gesture in a crowded morning, a new story had been written, one of healing, growth, and connection. Because sometimes, the softest moments leave the deepest mark. And sometimes, a cleaner, once overlooked, becomes someone unforgettable, just by choosing kindness. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, reminded you of something real, or simply made you feel, then don't forget, kindness is never wasted. To enjoy more powerful, heartwarming African stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Breeze Tales and turn on the bell so you never miss a moment that could change everything. We'll see you in the next story.